Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's live free training from the School of Traditional Skills. I'm excited to be here with you today. We're going to have Dr. Patrick Jones on, the homegrown herbalist, talking about treating cuts and wounds from an herbal perspective. So I'm really excited about this class because you're going to get solid first aid, just some basic solid first aid, but we're using herbs to help heal the wound, to help clean it, to help deal with pain. And that was really exciting because they're natural. And most of these herbs are things that you can even grow yourself. So I'm going to be really excited to welcome in Dr. Jones here in a few minutes. We got a lot of people coming in. Wow, there is over, it looks like 2,500 of you here already and a lot more coming. So we're going to take a few minutes, do a little house cleaning, get to know each other for a minute so that everybody's got some time to get here. I don't want anybody that signed up for this to miss it. And so, hey, welcome. My name, if you haven't been to one of these before, is Josh Thomas. I'm one of the founders of the School of Traditional Skills. And we created the school to bring you guys quality education that can help you on your journey learning traditional skills. We do these free live events about once a month. We're doing a yearly summit where we bring a lot of our instructors together. And of course, we have the school where there is a deeper dive class that backs up each one of these free live events because we just cannot cover everything here. We'd have to stay here for a day to talk about all the things that are in the classes. So we have the deeper dive classes for you guys that want to dive deeper into any of these subjects. And they are really, really good classes. I'm going to tell you a little bit more a little later today about Dr. Jones's class, but you're going to get some exciting value. You're going to walk away from this course today, this free training, knowing how to deal with cuts and wounds in a new way. One of the things I want to let you know right off the bat, there's still a ton of people coming in. I'm watching people introduce themselves. And hey, if you are jumping in, make sure you introduce yourself. Let us know where you're from, what you're excited about in being here. I'm looking at the chat right here, and I'm seeing folks from Nebraska, from Utah, from Florida, from Canada. I see there's people that looks like they've been following along with Dr. Patrick Jones for quite a while already. There's New York, Arkansas. Lots of people here, and really, really exciting. On the tech side, if you're having sound or video issues, feel free to let us know, but they are probably an issue with your streaming or your internet. Sometimes it helps to log out, log back in. Feel free to make a comment and we'll try to help if we can, but usually things are running pretty good here. Also want to let you know that there will be a replay. So I know sometimes you got to leave early. You're coming in late. Sometimes there's just internet issues. Don't worry about it. There will be a replay. We will send that out later today. So if you do have to skip out, it's okay. You'll get the replay. But hey, I really want to encourage you not to skip out for two reasons. One, Dr. Jones is staying with us for a live Q&A for about an hour afterwards. So you're going to be able to watch this training, and then I'm going to field questions, and we want to get to as many questions as we can. So make sure and hang out for that and do that live so that we can try to answer your question. The other thing is that we are going to be giving away some free lifetime access to the School of Traditional Skills. And we're going to give away several lifetime memberships during the Q&A portion, and you have to be here for that to claim it. So try to stick it out if you can. It's going to be well worth your while. Wow, there's over 3,300 people registered here. People are still coming in. So I want to give everybody a few minutes here before we start to dive in. I'm seeing people still coming in from Alberta and Virginia, Alabama, Colorado, North Carolina. I think we're covering the United States and maybe North America pretty well here. And it looks like folks are really, really excited. So let's get into the details. What are we talking about today? So we're talking about how to use herbs and first aid techniques in order to treat these cuts and wounds at home. And this is really an exciting topic. I think there are more and more of us that are realizing we want to break a little bit of dependence on modern systems. We don't want to have to rush rush to the ER or the urgent care all the time. And we don't need to. With some skills, with some good knowledge, with some of what nature provides, we can take care of that ourselves. We can provide a little more self-sufficiency and resiliency for our families and the people around with us. And I'm assuming a lot of you agree with that. Let me know. Give me a thumbs up in the chat if you do, and what you're excited to be learning about today. And here's the details. We're going to cover the important steps of how to safely and effectively use herbal remedies for caring for a cut or wound at home. Now, with that, Dr. Jones is also going to be covering when you need to go get medical help with that cut and wound, and how to think that through, because there are things, there's a lot of things we can deal with at home, probably more than some of you realize, but there's definitely a time where you need to go get some medical attention and help. So we're going to talk about that today. Dr. Jones is also going to show you how to use herbs to wash the wound and how to help with the healing of that wound to decrease infection and promote healing. It's been my experience through Carolyn's knowledge of herbs, and she has studied with Dr. Jones a lot, that using herbs to clean and help with the healing of the wound are faster and more effective than any standard allopathic method that I've ever used. And that's just a few of the things we're going to cover. So make sure that you are ready to take some notes, get a pen and a notepad, get yourself a beverage out. You can even take screenshots of this if you want, and you're tech savvy, you know how to do that. That's just fine. We want you to get the most of this free training, the most out of this free training as you can. So make sure and do that. Also, though, at the end of the training and before the QA, I'm going to let you know a little bit more about the school and the class, because we go a lot further. Dr. Jones goes a lot further than just cuts and wounds in dealing with first aid issues at home from an herbal perspective. So I'll dive into that. I think you're going to be really excited about what is in that full class. And of course, as I mentioned, Doc's going to stay here. He's going to hang out after all of that. And he's going to answer your questions live. We're going to get to as many of them as possible. And sometimes that's some of the most valuable part, where we really, get to talk things out and dive into even more details. So you know what? That's it. We're getting ready to go. We've got a little video here for you to kick things off about Dr. Jones and his training.
How many hours have you spent in a waiting room at your doctor's office, or maybe even at the emergency room, because of some minor first aid emergency? How much money did you spend to get those problems solved? And how many of those issues do you think could have been solved without pharmaceuticals that may cause other problems? The fact is that many of these minor issues and injuries that send most folks to their doctor these days can be easily taken care of at home. Hi, I'm Dr. Patrick Jones. So I'm a veterinarian for about 30 years. I'm a traditional naturopath and a clinical herbalist. And I've been using medicinal plants and other natural modalities to heal animals and people for a long time. After high school, I went down to Peru. I was a missionary down in Peru for a while, and I spent some time with these amazing people that still live very close to the land and use the plants God gave us to solve all sorts of problems. It had a really big impact on me. So when I got back to the States, I decided to go to veterinary school. So when I started my vet practice, I started using some herbs for things, slippery elm for gut stuff, echinacea for infections, pretty basic things. And about every case that came through my door got some herbs for something. And because I was a veterinarian, I had the opportunity to use herbs on all kinds of cases that most herbalists don't get to address. I was the emergency room for the dogs, right? So I'm treating gunshot wounds and rattlesnake bites and sepsis and kidney failure. And anything you can think of, I was addressing with herbs. So while I was using herbs on my veterinary patients, it started being the case that the owner would butt in and want some help. I'd be taking care of his dog and he'd say, my dog is walking like a 3-year-old instead of a 12-year-old. You got anything for me? My hip is killing me. And so we would do some herbal stuff for that. It turns out that the success I was having with the animals gave me this completely inappropriate confidence level with humans. So for a lot of years, I've had 2 practices. We had a veterinary practice for animals and a naturopathic practice for humans. So if you're a dog, you go to this building, and if you're just sick as a dog, you go to the other building, but we'd get you straightened out one way or the other. And now I'm excited to be here with you at the School of Traditional Skills. In this series, you're going to learn about controlling bleeding, cleaning and closing cuts, even speeding the healing and treating infections that might show up in cuts and sores. In short, you'll have the knowledge and tools to solve all sorts of problems. I'm Dr. Patrick Jones from the Homegrown Herbalist School, and you are going to be an amazing healer.
Right. So Dr. Patrick Jones is a clinical herbalist. He's a practicing veterinarian and a traditional naturopath. For many years, he owned and operated the Fairview Animal Hospital in Buell, Idaho. Now, he also practices as a clinical herbalist for man and beast. He's gotten to see the power of herbs bless the lives of his veterinary patients and his human clients, especially in first aid situations. As a result, the doc has a passion for herbal medicine and evangelical zeal to teach others about these wonderful plants. Now, this passion's given rise to the Homegrown Herbalist LLC, a company dedicated to teaching others the principles of botanical medicine so that they can be more self-sufficient and have a better quality of life. Dr. Jones does a lot of lecturing, workshops, and herb walks to help people roll up their sleeves and get beyond the theoretical and into real applications. The culmination of this passion for teaching others is the Homegrown Herbalist School of Botanical Medicine. Dr. Jones is married to his dear wife, Lori, and together they're parents of 15 children and grandparents of 11 grandchildren. And they grow and process over 100 different medicinal plants on their property in Idaho. That is really, really cool. And I just want to welcome Dr. Patrick Jones. Hey, Doc.
Oh, glad to be here. I'm great. I'm excited to be here.
All right. We are so excited to have you here. Before we get into some of the nuts and bones, how's things going? Let us know kind of where you're at. What's the weather like? What's your what's going on in your neck of the world?
Well, we're still having January down here in southern Idaho. It's been pretty eventful as far as the school and the business. It's been very eventful. Usually winter's a little quieter time for me, but we've had a lot of I'm doing a lot of things with the school, doing a lot of new lessons and presentations and stuff. And we're also we can't keep up with our product needs. You know, we also sell herbs and formulas and stuff. And so we're building another building. We keep outgrowing our buildings. And so we're chasing a lot of different projects and have a lot of irons in the fire, but I'm keeping out of trouble for the most part.
Well, that can be hard to do sometimes. And, you know, that's really cool to hear. And I think it's exciting to see so many people turning to natural modalities, you know, for healing, whether that's for like cuts and wounds here or for colds and flus or whatever it is. People are really, really waking up to the benefits. And that's just exciting to me.
Yeah, I think there's a real awareness growing in the population that modern medicine is not the only answer, and it's that sometimes it's not the best answer. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's a great answer, but not always. And for a lot of what we're doing, you know, a lot of the issues people have really don't require clogging up a waiting room and restricting access of care to other people who really do need to be in the emergency room, you know. So it's great that people, and the medical profession too, is starting to warm up a little bit. I get phone calls from physicians, you know, wanting input and having questions about this or that, you know, and they're trying to learn things, and they're becoming more accepting of, you know, some things people have been doing for thousands of years. So that's good too.
Yeah, I think that's a neat perspective to think about. By embracing some of this knowledge and learning how to apply this, creating a little medical self-sufficiency for yourself, you're also helping others. That's an interesting thought, that you're, you know, taking out the clog a little bit in the ER or the urgent care room and not clogging that up for things that you could really deal with at home, and in many cases even deal with better. That's a really cool thought. I like that. So let's dive right in. And I'd love to know, before we get into some of the actual teaching, how has working with animals as a veterinarian affected your understanding of herbs, particularly in the first aid setting that we're talking about today?
Well, you know, I was a veterinarian I'm still a veterinarian, but I was a full-time, all the time veterinarian for about 30 years. And it really did give me access to opportunities to do things and try things as an herbalist that most herbalists don't get to do. And I mean, I was the emergency room for the veterinary patients. If you go to a regular herbalist with a gunshot wound or a rattlesnake bite or, gangrene starting or whatever, he's going to send you to the emergency room. But I was the emergency room. And so I was addressing all those things. And I found that, I had pharmaceuticals and I had a nice surgery suite. I could go in and put things together if I needed to. And we had x-rays. We had everything any veterinarian has. But I found very often that medicinal plants were more effective than pharmaceuticals and modern therapies for a lot of things, not for everything, but for a lot of things. They were less expensive for the clients, much to my financial detriment. But they were also easier to use for the clients and easier to metabolize and incorporate by the dog. Our bodies were designed to use plant material. They know just what to do with plant chemistry. Mm-hmm. When you take a pill, your body says, what the heck is that? What plant is that like? How do I metabolize and use that drug? Because all we have is plant pathways. That's how we incorporate things into our body. And so when the medicine is a plant, that makes everything easier for the body. They're much more bioavailable, fewer side effects. It was just a great tool. And the more I used it, the more I realized that it was sometimes a much better tool.
Yeah. So let's dive into a little bit the crossover between animals and humans in a medical setting. And, I think some people that's pretty obvious, but some people that might be a little like, okay, that works for animals, but how do we know that works for humans? And of course, you've had just a tremendous depth of experience in both.
Yeah. So there are some subtle differences, sometimes some very stark differences from one mammal species to another, but not nearly as many as you'd think. And honestly, people always ask me, because in the Homegrown Herbalist School, we're focusing mostly on human conditions and human situations, but I cover all the veterinary stuff too. But, people often ask me, what would I do for a dog? What would I do for my horse? And the answer is almost always, you do the same thing you do for yourself. Mammals are mammals for the most part. There's a few little differences here and there, and we cover those when they matter, but it's very, very, very similar. In fact, the texts for herbal medicine, the oldest texts that we have from China and India were actually about horses and dogs, or cows, how to keep your livestock alive. You can have another kid, but if your cow dies, everybody dies, and so herbal medicine has a really long history with veterinary applications. And a lot of human herbalism has, been spawned by things they were actually doing with animals. And so there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah. Well, it's great. And that's, we've learned a lot doing that, right? And then learned how to apply that to the human setting. And you're really, okay, sorry, I was seeing something there. You've really pioneered this and are helping so many of us along. And so I want to get into the first piece of content here where we're going to talk about just what to do when you get a cut. What are the first things you do? And which of course are stopping bleeding. Most of us know that you get a cut, first thing you do is stop the bleeding, and then we move to get it cleaned up. So we're going to dive into that, but real quick, before our moderator runs that, you guys, I know you got a lot of questions, so I just want to remind you, please hold your questions right now. It clogs up the chat. Doc Jones may answer them, whether it's in a couple of these videos or in the sessions that we'll do talking about them. And we'll get to them towards the end. So please hold them in case he answers them. And then at the appropriate time, I'll let you know, you can put them into the Q&A box when it's time to answer those, but just want to try to keep things from getting too messy out there. So with that, let's roll this section from his full class on stopping bleeding in a wound and cleaning that wound out.
So let's start at the very beginning and say there's some bleeding that is very serious and very life-threatening, right? So how do you know which ones are okay for you to manage at home? And how do you know which ones that you need to be in the car running to the ER for? And I think it'll be pretty obvious in the situation. But if you have significant bleeding, if you have an artery with pulsating blood coming out, that needs a doctor's attention because he's probably going to have to tie that off. If you have, any significant blood loss, and if what you're doing isn't stopping the bleeding, you need to get medical attention. All right. But for most things we're talking about, for little cuts and minor injuries, the things that we're going to talk about are just fine. The most instinctive thing, and probably the most effective thing, honestly, for minor bleeding is to just apply direct pressure, right? You just put your hand on there and stop that bleeding. If it's your blood, right? If it's somebody else's blood, put your glove on and then do it. Also, if it's on a limb or an extremity, you can raise that limb. That'll slow blood flow and help slow bleeding down. That's good. But there's also some really great herbs to stop bleeding. And I do this all the time in my veterinary practice. We get a lot of very serious bleeding cases and very serious wound cases. And in these, like I said, in these next few lessons, we're going to be talking about these things. But we're talking about, pretty minor first aid kind of things, not emergency deep trauma things. But the herbs that we're going to use to stop bleeding in these minor things are really useful. One that I really like is cayenne. Another is yarrow. And shepherd's purse is another one. But what we're going to talk about here, we'll talk about yarrow and cayenne especially. Cayenne is cayenne pepper, right? And it's just the whole pepper is the medicine. And it's very good topically or internally for bleeding. It's a little bit zingy topically, and it's quite zingy internally too, for that matter. But it's not zingy enough to be a deal breaker. And in fact, cayenne actually has some chemistry in it that stops pain. So it's zingy for a minute, and then all of a sudden it's not, because it's interacting with has some interactions with substance P and some other complex physiology stuff. But it actually stops pain. So if you're in the kitchen and you cut your finger, grab the cayenne pepper out of your spice drawer and put it on there. That's what it is. It's cayenne pepper. All right. The other one is yarrow. So yarrow is an herb we've used for some other things, and we'll talk about it again in some other lessons in the future. The flower and the leaf are the medicine. But I've used this on countless cases. This is the one I almost always use, is yarrow. One of the common names for this plant, we mentioned before, is soldier wort. Wort, again, is the old English word for plant. Okay, so soldier wort is soldier plant. Even up to World War I, from ancient guys like the Greeks and the Romans, all the way to World War I, soldiers would carry a bag of powdered yarrow on their belt in case they got wounded, and they'd pack it into the wound to stop the bleeding. Yarrow is a really safe herb. You do not want to use this if you're pregnant. You don't want to use it if you're nursing. But otherwise, for topical use, it's fine for pregnancy or nursing. If you got a cut, put it on. But don't take it internally if you're pregnant or nursing, okay? When I'm using a plant to stop bleeding, if it's a small cut, I like to use just the dry powdered form. That works great, So if you're cut your finger while you're chopping carrots in the kitchen, you can just put some cayenne pepper right on that. It'll usually stop the bleeding. Or some yarrow powder, right? The powder is nice because it's also dry. So that's going to help dry things up too. If it's a larger wound, then I usually will mix that powder with a little bit of water just to make a thick paste. And we'll show you in a second how to do that. Just because it's easier to put it on and keep it on while I'm finding something to wrap it up with, right? That works good. One thing I don't use is, for topical bleeding, I don't usually use tinctures. And the reason I don't use tinctures or teas for bleeding topically is because the fluid nature of those products, washes away the clotting factors that are trying to stop the bleeding naturally. Your body's trying to fix this problem too. And we don't want to keep washing away the little clots that are forming. The other thing about a tincture topically in an open wound is that hurts like crazy because alcohol stings. Okay. So I'm not going to use a tincture topically to stop bleeding. I do use them internally. Okay. I use yarrow internally. I have this is one of our formulas called bleeding that has yarrow and shepherd's purse and bugleweed, some other things. But anyway, I use both of these in my vet practice all the time for internal bleeding, but that's a whole different topic. And we have, much deeper discussions of that in the school. But for what we're addressing here, little wounds and cuts and first aid things, we're probably not going to need to do anything internal for an injury like that. All right, we're just going to do topical stuff. So like I said, the powder topically, whether it's yarrow or cayenne, that's going to work great. If it's a larger wound, we're going to make a paste, a poultice. All right, let me show you how to do that. So what are we going to need? Well, very simple stuff. First of all, remember we're going to want some gloves because we don't want to be touching other people's blood and wounds. We're going to need some dry herbs. We're going to need a spoon. We're going to need a bowl to mix it in. We need some water. There's some water. Something to wrap the bandage on and some bandage material. On a wound, it's a good idea to have a sterile bandage. That's a great idea. You can use these non-adhesive sterile pads, or, I use the clean surgical sponges too. I do that all the time. I've never had any trouble with that. So let me show you how to do it. We're just going to make a yarrow poultice. And remember, if it's just a little cut, I'm just going to do that, right? That's all you need to do on a little cut. But if it's a larger wound, a larger cut, and you want to get a little more material on it and not have it blowing all over and stuff, then you just put some yarrow in a bowl. How much? Some. Okay, it doesn't matter. We're not measuring anything here. We're just making a paste. A few spoonfuls of that. A little bit of water to thicken it up. Where's William? William, come help us for a second. And we're just going to make a thick paste out of that for William's wound, right? Mm-hmm. And again, we're just going to make a really thick paste here. We don't want it too wet because dry is good. I'll put a little more in there. It's getting a little too wet now. What you want is Play-Doh, okay? That's what you want. So we've got our poultice all mixed up. And first thing we're going to do is put on our gloves, right? In case William has any bad diseases. You have any bad diseases today? Probably not. We don't know. We're not going to worry about that because now we have some gloves. Plus, I won't be getting any germs in your wounds. We're just going to use one of these sterile, non-adhesive pads. And it's basically just clean cotton, okay? And we're going to put the poultice right on that wound. And I'm going to put a lot of that on there, Stick it on there. We're doing it like we mean it, okay? Then we're going to put the pad on there. And then we're going to wrap it with some of our vet wrap, our Coflex, okay? Let me show you something else about the Coflex. Did you notice I cut it off before I put it on? And then I'm going to roll it up again, so I can put it on easily. And you might say, well, why the heck does he keep doing that? Well, it's because if I take this and put it on and pull it off as I'm wrapping it, it's way too tight. Okay, that's too tight of a bandage. And so I always take it off first, roll it up again, and then lift your arm up. And then I can put it on however tight I want, right? And it doesn't have to be super tight, obviously. We don't want his fingers turning blue, right? There you go. Now, if it's going to behave itself and stop bleeding, it'll do that fairly quickly. If it's not, this is a great thing to do 2 minutes before you jump in the car to go get that dealt with at the emergency room. All right? But that's it. That's how you do the poultice. And, unless it's a really serious wound, unless there's arterial bleeding, this usually will solve the problem. What if you do have a serious bleed? What if you have a really bad wound and it's really bleeding a lot? Now what do you do? Well, I would still wrap that. I would probably still throw the yarrow on it and wrap that. And then, get in the car and get to the hospital and get that sewed up, right? Because letting it just bleed freely and wildly in the car is a really bad idea. He's going to have significant blood loss on the way. So no matter whether you're going to deal with the whole thing at home or whether you're going to take him to get it addressed, medically, it's still a good idea to get some pressure on that. And if you got some yarrow, great. It only takes a second, and then get him to someone that can sew that up and deal with the issues that need to be dealt with medically or surgically. But like I said, for nine times out of 10, if it's a small cut, the type of thing you'd handle at home, this is all you need to do. That yarrow in addition to stopping the bleeding, is going to help with pain a little bit. It's a great antibiotic. It's doing all kinds of great stuff. Like I said earlier in another lesson, herbs have a hard time making up their mind what they want to do, so they do a lot of things. Now, medical folks use things like, hydrogen peroxide or betadine or chlorhexidine to clean wounds out. And all those things are really great for killing bugs, but they're also pretty hard on cells. They're pretty hard on tissue. And you may or may not have them handy when you need them. And so another option is, and one that I like better, in fact, is to make an herbal tea and clean the wound with that. Yarrow, calendula, chamomile, hops, and 50 other herbs are really great at making a wound cleaning tea. So what you're going to do is you're going to make a tea, just like we've done in some of the other lessons, like we did in the eye wash lesson just a minute ago. First of all, we're dealing with a wound, so we're going to make sure our workstation's clean. We're going to boil some water, and I've already made the tea, all right? So what I did is I took a cup of boiling water, and I mixed it with a rounded teaspoonful of calendula and yarrow, and I put some hops in there, 3 good antibiotic herbs, all right? And it's been sitting, and remember, I put the lid on it so that the good stuff can't evaporate out, the essential oils and the volatile oils that are good. We'll just strain that tea. So what we're going to do is we're going to wash out that wound, okay? And what I do is I use a syringe because I'm a veterinarian. I got a whole building full of syringes, okay? But you don't have to have a syringe. You could use a bulb syringe. You could use a turkey baster. You could use an eyedropper. You could just pour it over the wound, okay? All we're doing is flushing this out and cleaning out that wound. So let's see. We need a wounded person. Willie, come help us some more. All right, so we got William here with us, and he's volunteered to be wounded today and have that addressed. That's okay with you, right? Mm-hmm. But he thought it would be better if we did the wound with a Sharpie and not with a sharp object. And so I guess Sharpie is close enough for sharp, isn't it? So we're going to give him a good wound right there. Does that hurt? If it does, I got some herbs for you. All right. And then we're going to clean this wound. And I'm going to use the tea to do it. And when I do it, I just use a syringe because I'm a veterinarian. I got a whole building full of syringes, right? But if you had a bulb syringe, like you clean out your kid's ear with, or a turkey baster, as long as they're clean, right? Or an eyedropper, or even just, pour the tea over the wound and flush it out that way. That'll work, all right? But we don't have a sink here handy, but what we're going to do is we'll just hold it over this pot, and we're just going to suck this up. And we're just going to flush that wound out, right? Is that feeling cleaner? Mm-hmm. Now, if there's a lot of debris, if there's foreign material in there, sand or gravel or rocks or something, you may want to take one of these little surgical sponges, and while you're flushing it out, just gently sort of remove anything mechanical that's in there that's problematic. But the herbs in this are antibiotic herbs. They're also anti-inflammatory, and they're doing a lot of good things for that tissue, as opposed to hydrogen peroxide or iodine or chlorhexidine or some of the other chemicals that we often use in the medical profession, which are actually damaging the tissue. That tissue's already having a bad enough day. Let's do something nice to it while we clean the wound instead of irritating it more and killing more cells. So that's how we're going to clean it.
All right. That is fantastic. It's really simple, isn't it?
It's really simple. And those techniques are techniques that I've used on all kinds of wounds, even sometimes really serious wounds, and they just work.
Yeah. You mentioned serious wounds, and I think, for any of us, especially trying to break free from the mentality of just go rush to the professional, we're learning to trust, what God's given us, to trust, learning how to do things like this that have really been done for thousands of years, but we want to make a good decision. And so can you cover a little bit the guidelines for deciding for yourself or for anybody here, how do I look at that situation? How do I look at that cut and go, okay, this is beyond me, this is time to just go as quickly as I can to medical help, versus learning to be confident that, hey, I can take these things I'm learning here with Dr. Jones and apply them. I think that's, to me, probably one of the trickiest things, especially for a parent, to make sure we're making a good decision there.
Yeah. And it is tricky. And I mean, it's not even just tricky medically, it's tricky emotionally and mentally. And am I up for doing this? And that's going to be a different level for everybody, but if I guess the simplest answer is, if what you're doing is working, you're okay. If it's not, use it like a Band-Aid until you can get somewhere else where you can get some real help. So if you have bleeding and you have significant blood loss, you're going to want to put pressure on it anyway while you're going to the emergency room. And so if you don't know if it's a cut and it seems like it's kind of bleeding pretty good, put the poultice on it, put the wrap on it, and if it stops bleeding, you win. If it keeps bleeding, or if you have pulsating arterial blood, the way you can tell if an artery's cut is it pulses with your heartbeat. Those are harder to stop the bleeding, and you're probably going to have to get that, clamped and ligated and tied off. But otherwise, if it seems to you like it's making the progress that you would expect, then I think you're all right. And the same thing with the wound. If the wound is looking good, or with a respiratory infection or a bladder infection or whatever it is, if you're using herbs and you're getting the results and things are improving, you're winning. And if they're not, get some intervention, get an herbalist with a deeper understanding, get a medical doctor, get somebody else that can help you out. We don't want to get out of our depth immediately when we start these things. And one of the things is to become accustomed to doing it. Fix Timmy's little cut finger while the world is nice, so that when the world is in a different condition someday, maybe you have some practice and some skills and some experience, and it's not as big a deal, and you kind of know what to expect, and you have the skill set. These are things we ought to be doing all the time. It really becomes a lifestyle kind of a thing. And whether it's your kid who cut his finger, or your goat who cut her leg on a piece of barbed wire, the principles are the same principles, and we ought to be engaging with it and using it and practicing, so that if the time ever does come, that you're out hiking in the woods or hunting, or it's the apocalypse or whatever, and you don't have immediate access to resources, that you can be the resource, and you have some background and some experience, instead of at that point saying, gee, what did that guy on the video say about this? No, it's, what did I do 100 times in my kitchen? It needs to be a lifestyle thing.
I like that. And that's kind of that, practicing. We don't want to just buy seeds and put them on the shelf and wait till the world falls apart to use them, right? We don't want to buy a pressure canner and say, well, one day when things are getting tough and the grocery store shelves are empty, I'll start canning. We need to start practicing now, whether we think we need it or not. And so I think what I hear you saying, which is really cool, is start using these methods on everything that comes up. Maybe even if it's a little cut and it's minor and you feel like a little water and a Band-Aid's fine. Well, maybe go through the motions of washing and treating and pulling out the herbs and using them, because then you're getting yourself into that response habit, and you're going to be building confidence, it sounds like, in doing that, so that when you do hit a bigger thing, that you can still feel confidently handling that, and then knowing, where to move on.
Yep. And I use herbs on horrific, really bad, serious wounds all the time, have for years and years and years. If you want to see some case studies, go to homegrownherbalist.net and go to the blog. And there's some cases there of, really major wounds we've done just with herbs and nothing else. And the reason that I do that is because I've done a bazillion other things smaller than that first, and I've just developed the skill set and the experience that I can do this. It's just like that other one. It's just bigger, here we go. And you develop by doing, it's just like you said, it's not the seeds that are going to save your life in the apocalypse. It's knowing how to grow a garden, and those are two very different things.
So put it to work now. So diving in a little bit deeper here for kind of the outlier situations, but for a lot of our audience may not be so outlier. And that is that we're living remote. We're a long ways out. Or there's going to be a lot of people that are outdoorsy here. We hunt, we kayak, we do a lot of things. I know there's a lot of people in this audience that do the same. And you're in situations where you can't just get to medical help. So one, this knowledge, this is just basic first aid knowledge, is really, really important. But I think with the herbs here, there are some things that really accelerate your ability to help in these situations where you're going to be slowed down or inhibited getting to help. Would you add anything, thinking of that context, would you add anything to this methodology, or want people to think a little bit differently if they're dealing with a situation, but they're literally out in the woods, or, they're way out back off grid and the vehicle isn't running? Anything you'd approach differently or want people to think about in that scenario?
No, and the beautiful thing about herbal medicine is if you dig in and really commit to learning some things, and it doesn't have to be a ton of things, but if you knew 10 plants really well, you could do an enormous number of things for your family, But the nice thing about herbal medicine is if you're out in the woods, camping or hunting or hiking or whatever, and something happens, you're surrounded by medicine. The resources are there, but you have to be able to recognize them, and you have to know how to use them. And neither of those things is a big climb or a big reach. It's just something that you need to do. But the resources will be there in a wild situation. I took about 30 young men out into the desert. This was several years ago, with nothing. I gave them each a knife. We gave them about 4 feet of paracord and a couple of empty Gatorade bottles. They emptied them right before we left. And that's all we took. No sleeping bags, no tents, no food, no nothing. And for 3 days, we tromped through the desert of southern Idaho and kept our bellies full. And if we had little medical mishaps, we fixed those with weeds that were growing all over the place. And we did just fine. And it's because, I and a couple of other gentlemen that were with me knew what things were and how to use them. We were just as at home out there as if I was in the vet clinic. I got all the same plants on the shelf as I've got out in the wild, and we did fine. And it's just an information that we need to acquire if we want to have that kind of independence. If you want to be able to go out and hunting and camping and hiking and stuff, and if something goes on, it's not the end of the world. You just take care of it, until you can get back to somewhere where if you need more care, you can get it, but you can get him there safely because you've dealt with the immediacy of the problem very readily with plants that are growing all over the place.
Yeah. Practice, observe.
Yep.
You talk about those 10 herbs. And of course, in your class with the School of Traditional Skills, you dive into 10 readily available herbs that you either can buy, you can grow, and a lot of those you can actually find out in natural environment. And so you do dive into that in detail in the class. But obviously, in order to be able to treat wounds with herbs, to clean them or stop the bleeding, you've got to have those herbs. And so do you just, obviously you keep them on hand. What do you recommend to people, and what form for some of these herbs is the best way to have some things like yarrow on the shelf and easily accessible to start learning this and applying this?
Yeah, it's a lot nicer to have a jar of yarrow than to have to go harvest the yarrow while the guy's bleeding to death. That's that's absolutely true. And having some things on hand, whether you're at home or whether you're out in the field, having some things on hand is very valuable and very useful. We put a kit together for this class that has everything in the class, and there's a link in the skill sheet, I think, for it. But if you had that in your kitchen cupboard, you'd have the things you need to do all the things we do in the class. At homegrownherbalist.net, we sell some other little kits too that are smaller and handier and, for this and that. But having some stuff on hand is really wise. And being able to make that stuff and replace it and replenish it yourself is also a very important skill and a very easily learned skill. How do you make a tincture? How do you make a tea? When I run out of something, how do I make some more? So I have it on hand, so those are all things that we need to learn how to do.
Yeah. And you cover that well in the full class, which we'll talk about in a little while. In a minute here, we're going to get on to closing the wound and then managing the healing of an infection. But one last question. How do you know when you've gotten a wound clean enough, to move on to the next step? How do you know that so you can feel comfortable going to that next step?
Well, it's just, I've been cleaning wounds for 30 years. When they look clean, they're clean. There's nothing magical or complicated about it. You look at it, you can't see the bacteria, but you can see that, if it's a wound that has debris in it, you can see as that debris gets cleaned out. You can see that I went by with the sponge and nothing came off. I must be okay. It's just like cleaning your counter. It's really not much more complicated than that. And the herbs are doing their work. They are having all kinds of chemical actions, antibacterial actions and stuff, just like the iodine or the peroxide would be having. So it's basically just a visual thing.
So trust your observation skills, essentially.
Yep.
Yeah, and I bring that out for a minute because we've been taught not to trust, our own abilities. And
right.
This is an area where you've got to learn to take instruction, practice, and know that you can do this and trust your abilities to observe and act. And that's important for, any of us as we approach different situations, but specifically people that are new to thinking some of these ways. You've got to learn to trust yourself. And we've been taught not to. We've been taught we always have to go to some professional in a white coat. And yeah, there are times for that, but there are plenty of times when we can trust ourselves and handle this.
Yep. And I'll tell you, the body has, I was joking around just yesterday with our plumber. He was putting some stuff together and I says, plumbing is a lot more complicated than surgery, because with surgery, we just have to get things mostly right. The plumbing's got to be exactly right. But the body really is very adept at healing itself and resolving its issues and dealing with things if we give it what it needs.
Yeah, just help it out a little.
Yep.
Cool. Well, cool. Let's jump into the next section. We're going to talk about actually closing up a wound and then the healing process along with managing infection here in this next section.
All right, so once the wound's clean, it's time to close it up. Yeah, I'm going to show you a really simple and effective way to close a wound, and you don't even have to be a surgeon. So it's really easy. You need some very basic materials. You're going to want some duct tape, or if you're really serious, you can use Gorilla Tape. You can use that on people or gorillas, it doesn't matter. You're going to need some fishing line. You're going to need a coffee straw. And this is actually one that's been cut in half. You want you can get these anywhere that you buy a cup of coffee in the morning. And it doesn't have to be a coffee straw. It can be any straw. In fact, it can be anything, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But you need something like this, all right? We'll show you what. And then I'm going to have a little hole punch because it's faster than doing it with my pocket knife, but I've done it both ways. So let me show you what we're going to do. This is called the duct tape suture kit, and you would be astounded the kinds of cases that have been resolved with this really simple technique. First thing we're going to do is we're going to get some tape. We need 2 pieces of duct tape. And what we're going to do is we're just going to lay those flat. And the only tricky part of this is getting the duct tape off your finger. And then this is where we're going to use our little straws. And we want to come in about a 1/2 inch. All right. We're just going to lay that right there. Now, when we've done that, we're going to fold the ends over. Okay, so we've folded that end over the straw. Okay, and then that's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and cut these straw ends off because we don't need them to stick out. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put some holes along the edge of that. As you can see, I've been very careful to make these in a very straight, precise line with surgical skill, right? But it doesn't matter. It's going to work fine. So let me show you what we're going to do. So now we need our owie. Stick your arm right there, William. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut a piece of fishing line. And we're going to take this and we're going to put these tapes so that the edge of the tape, the edge of the surface is running horizontal to the wound, parallel to the wound is what I mean, okay? And you want to put them so that they're about a finger width from the wound to the tape edge, all right? You see that? You got about, what's that, 1.5 centimeters, Willie? How far is that? That's about 1.5 centimeters, isn't it? And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. We want to have a little space between the wound edge and the tape edge, all right? So once we have the tape on there, now all we have to do is just lace it up like a boot, all right? This is not rocket science. So we're just going to run our suture through the holes, just like you're lacing up a shoe. So you can see we've put those holes, I don't know, about 1 centimeter apart. It's not super important, but on a typical piece of duct tape, I'm probably going to fit 4 holes on there, okay? All right, now you can see that the reason that I put the straws in there was so that that fishing line can't tear out of the tape. That's the only reason the straw is there. You could put a Q-tip in there. You could put a piece of shoestring in there. It doesn't matter what it is. You just need something in there folded over so that, the fishing line, I say the mistake because honestly, for 30 years, I did surgery using fishing line on cows. Okay, so in my head, it is suture. Cows are made out of boot leather, so we sew them up with 50-pound fishing line. So now watch, we've got it all laced up. And what we're going to do is as we draw those strings tighter, watch how it pulls that skin together. It pulls that the wound edges together, okay? And then we're just going to tie a knot in the end of it. And you're all set, all right? So now you can see why it was important that we didn't have the edge of the tape right next to each other, right along the wound edge, because we need some space for that to pull together, right? And so as we pull it together, the wound closes before the tape meets. Does that make sense? And now the other advantage of that is we have this space here and we can do whatever we want herbally to that wound surface and not have the tape be in the way of doing that. If this tape starts to come off a week from now, you can put some more on. What if you have a really long wound? Well, then put 3 of them on there. What if you have a really tiny wound? Well, then just do 1 hole and use little pieces of tape, right? You can cut this duct tape any shape or size you want and manage whatever length of wound you need to manage to pull those wound edges together. And when you're bringing wound edges together, when I was in veterinary school and they were teaching us how to do surgery, they kept hammering into us, just have them touching each other. That's all we're doing. You don't want it tight. You don't want it all buckled up and tight. You just want those wound edges to touch, and then the body will take care of everything else. All right? So just bring this together until the wound edges come together, and then you're all set. So I would recommend, this seems pretty simple, but I'd recommend doing it a few times, right? You got a kid, you got a Sharpie, do this, practice, and make a few of these so that it's sort of a second nature, no-brainer, easy thing. And when he gets a cut, you don't have to go dig up that video that you saw 5 years ago, right? The other thing you can do that's really smart is you can make some of these ahead of time. And if you stick them to some wax paper, and throw them in your backpack, now you've got it. You've got some fishing line, you got your 2 duct tape Band-Aid amigos, and you can sew something up when you're out hunting or something. So we've talked about stopping the bleeding on a cut. We've talked about how to clean that wound, or we even talked about how to close it up. But there's still more we can do. The next step is for that wound to heal, and it also needs to be protected from infection. So believe it or not, this amazing green pharmacy that the good Lord put together for us has some fantastic tools for that too. So let's get started with healing. Poultices can be made either from fresh herbs, or you can use dry powdered herbs. That's what I usually do because that's what I've got on hand and that's easy. If you're using fresh herbs, just grind them up or chop them fine and put them right on the wound. If you're using dried herbs, just mix them with a little water to make a thick paste and then put that on the wound. I always put the poultice directly on the wound. Okay, I don't put a cloth in between it or anything. And people ask, well, how do you get it off the wound? You know, and if you go to the website, if you go to homegrownherbalist.net and go to the blog, you can see some of the wounds I'm talking about. I mean, really horrific, awful, big wounds from car accidents and terrible things. And we're just putting that poultice right on that big open wound. When you take it off, it just comes right off because the wound responds to that poultice with a lot of material that, you know, doctors call it exudate. The technical term is goo, right? But when you take that poultice off, it just pops right off and you don't have to wipe it off of the wound. So I just put the poultice herbs directly onto the wound. So here's a good poultice formula. We're going to have 4 parts comfrey, and then we're going to have 1 part of calendula, flax, plantain, yarrow, hops. Those are all going to be 1 part, and then 1/4 part of cayenne pepper. So let's show you how to do it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take our herbs, and again, these are just dry powdered herbs. This is how I always do it. When I'm working a case, I don't have time to go out in the yard and pull up comfrey and chop it up. You know, I'm just going to use powdered herbs. So what we're going to do is, it was 4 parts comfrey, right? So we'll put 4 spoonfuls of comfrey in there. And again, this is not precise measurement, all right? This is a topical application. If I did 3.5, it wouldn't matter. If I did 5, it wouldn't matter, okay? So the comfrey, let's talk about each one while we're putting it in. Remember, the comfrey is the rock star vulnerary, okay? This guy accelerates healing in amazing ways. It also has some anti-inflammatory properties. It also is really soothing topically and mechanically because it has a lot of mucilage in it, okay? And mucilage is a chemical that's in herbs like slippery elm and marshmallow and things like that. It's real soothing to irritated tissues, and comfrey has a ton of it in it, okay? So that's what comfrey's doing. Then we'll put in some calendula. And remember, we said calendula is an antibiotic. It's also an anti-inflammatory, and it accelerates healing too. Not as strong as comfrey, but it does some of that. We're just going to do 1 part of that. And I'm not doing these in alphabetical order like they are on the list, but now we're going to do 1 part of yarrow. And yarrow, remember, we said was great for stopping bleeding, but it's also a great antibiotic. All right. We're going to put some hops in there. Hops is a good antibiotic also, a really good one. Hops has also got some really great properties for pain. It relaxes nerves. It puts nerves to sleep and says, quit screaming, guys. We're going to have a nap right now. And that's really great for a wound. We're going to put some plantain in. Plantain also has some mild antibiotic properties. It has some very mild wound healing vulnerary properties, much more mild than the other kids that had some of that. The other thing I like about plantain a lot for a poultice is it pulls toxins and junk out of the wound. All right. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And then we're going to put just a little bit of cayenne. On the recipe, it says 1/4 part, right? I'm just going to put a little bit of that in there. What's the cayenne in there for? So cayenne, remember we said, is good for bleeding, but this wound's probably not bleeding at this point very much. It also has some antibiotic property. But the thing I really like about cayenne is that it's extremely stimulating to the tissue. I mean, when you put cayenne on an open wound, everybody wakes up and says, holy cow, something going on here. I better pay attention, right? The tissues are more active. The circulation's more active. It warms things up. It gets the good stuff coming in, the bad stuff going out, right? By improving circulation. So it's sort of a catalyst for all these other herbs. And then the last thing I'm going to put in is some flaxseed. And this is ground. It has to be ground or it won't do you any good, all right? And don't grind it until you're ready to use it. Flaxseed doesn't have a very good shelf life once it's ground, okay? because of all the oils in it. But I'm going to take a spoonful of the flax, one part of that, and put it in too. And what's it doing? Well, it has a little bit of mucilage kind of properties like the comfrey had that's soothing. But the main thing that the flax is doing is it's being a sponge, all right? It is mechanically pulling stuff out of that wound, absorbing fluid, absorbing infection, absorbing toxins, all kinds of mechanically pulling things out, okay? So we're going to stir that all up a little bit. All of our dried herbs here. And then we're going to add some water. And you might ask, well, gee, why are you using 4 different herbs that are antibiotics? Well, because that's a really great idea is why. In fact, even one herb that is an antibiotic is usually a much more effective antibiotic than pharmaceutical antibiotics in a lot of cases. And the reason is that a pharmaceutical like penicillin or amoxicillin has one antibiotic in it, right? Penicillin, there's one molecule in there that kills bugs. Calendula might have 10. Oregon grape, they did a study I've read lately that had 12 or 15, I can't remember, but it had a lot of very distinct antibiotic compounds in that one plant. And so as you combine 2 or 3 or 4 antibiotic plants, you're getting a really broad spectrum antibiotic action that's very hard for bacteria to get resistant to. If I came to your front door every morning and rang the doorbell and you came out and I whacked you with a stick, and I did that every day, how long would it take you to figure out how not to get whacked with that stick? And that's what penicillin is. It's a stick. And the bacteria figure it out pretty quick. Oh, the guy with the stick's coming. Let's figure this out. And they get resistant, right? But if I come to your door and I got a slingshot and I got a rubber hose and I got a squirt gun and I got a stick and I got all kinds of other things, well, now what are you to respond to first, right? How do you adapt to that? It's very difficult. And so the complexity and the diversity of the antibiotics, even in one plant, is amazing. But when you add 2 or 3 of them, wow, very hard for antibiotics resistance to develop in those bacteria. I've had some cases in the vet practice with infections that were really refractory, really resistant to pharmaceutical antibiotics. Like I couldn't get anywhere with an antibiotic. And in a lot of those cases, if I just got tired of the antibiotic and went to an herb, boom, they're done. Because it's a completely different spectrum of activity and the bugs aren't used to it. Okay. So I'm going to put a little more water in this. We're a little dry. The flax sucked up all my water. So now we need our wound. William, where's your wound? Come help us out here a little bit. All right. So remember, we talked about this duct tape suture trick, and we put the tape edges about a finger width away from the wound edge so that there was some space, not only for the cut edges to come together before the tape did, but also I have this space now, right? And so if you're using the duct tape suture, you can take that poultice formula and you can just put it right on there, okay? And those herbs now have direct contact with that wound, but we haven't interfered with the closure at all. So now we got the poultice on there. It's not going to stay on there if he goes out and plays, right? So we got to put something on to hold it on. And plus it's a good idea to keep the bugs out. So we're just going to get, again, a sterile bandage. This is just sterile gauze. You can get these anywhere. And we're going to put that on there. And then we're going to get some of our Coflex. And again, see that I've unwrapped it from the roll before I put it on the wound. Because if I took it straight from the roll, it'd be too tight on that wound, okay? So we don't want it tight. So we're going to roll it up so it's handy. Lift your arm up for me, bud. And we're going to wrap some Coflex around that just to keep the gauze from wandering off. And the gauze is just keeping the poultice from wandering off, right? So people often ask, how long do you leave the poultice on, right? I think I don't ever leave a poultice on for more than about 12 hours. And in a lot of cases, I'll go 12 hours on and 12 hours off. If you want to change the poultice more often, you can do it every 4 hours, every 6 hours. That's great. More is better, right? The fresher the herbs are, the better. And if it's early in the wound, sometimes I'll leave the poultice on for 24 hours, but I'll change it, right? And so I'm going to maybe every 8 hours, I'm going to put a fresh poultice on there, but I'll leave it poulticed for the first 24 hours just to pull stuff out of that wound. But after that, 12 hours on, 12 hours off is pretty good. And that just gives the wound a chance to breathe, gives things a chance to dry out a little bit, which is good. And when it's not got poultice on it, I'm probably going to put a bandage on it too, right? Because the poultice is probably going to be on during the day. And if it's not covered at night and you're, rolling around in the bed, you might hurt yourself or get something in there that you don't want. It's a good idea to have some bandaging on it. When you take the poultice off, have a look at that wound. How does it look? So in the first day or two, you might get a little more reddening of the tissue around it. And that's really what you want to look at. It's the tissue around the wound. How does that look? Okay. And like I say, the first day it might be a little red because you got a lot of increased circulation, right? It's all excited about the cayenne that's in there. Something's happening. We got a lot of circulation and inflammation and things going on to respond to that wound and that infection. After that, the tissue around should start looking better. If the tissue starts looking not good around the wound at all, go get medical attention. Get that thing dealt with. All right. But for the sorts of cuts and things that you guys are dealing with in a minor first aid situation, you're probably not going to have those kinds of issues.
Doc, I'm still trying to figure out what to do if you show up at my door with a slingshot whip, hose, and a stick. I can't quite get over that image.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the DIY sutures for a second. And love the duct tape, just raw, bare bones DIY. That's really, really cool. And a lot of people in the chat were excited about that idea. Is there any other tape you can use if you don't have duct tape on hand? Or what if you've just got your herbal first aid kit and you've got medical tape? Would that work, or can you just give us some alternatives?
So the reason I like the duct tape, you could use other kinds of tape, but the reason I like the duct tape is, first of all, it's really very adherent. It sticks for a long time. But the other reason I like it is that it's pretty impervious to water and moisture. If you used, they have that white medical tape that sort of, it's almost like a textile, sticky stuff. Mm-hmm. And some of those are better than others, but some of those will absorb some moisture. And if you think about a wound, if you're absorbing liquid into a bandage, that's a good place for bugs to grow. And so if it's going to be in contact long term, that's not ideal for the wound. You can put a bandage on and change it, and that's fine. But if you left the same bandage on for a long time, you'd be a much higher risk for infection. And so the nice thing about the duct tape is it doesn't absorb any liquid and it doesn't act as a host for bacterial infection. So it really is the best way to do it. If you were doing something short term to get down off the mountain, heck, use whatever you got, but if you're going to leave it on any length of time at all, the duct tape is going to be a much better choice. So that's why I use that.
Good to know. Let's talk about the poultice, the premixed poultice of herbs. Well, the poultice of herbs, you mixed it there, and that was one of the thoughts. Is I would assume, can you premix this and have it handy and all ready to go? It seems like you want to.
Absolutely, and that's that's what I do. I have a jar of poultice formula, and in the class we actually talk about something even easier and better than actually mixing the dry herbs, and that's making a wound spray out of that same formula. But we go into that more in the class. But that's almost always what I do now. I almost never use, an actual poultice on a wound. Some cases I do every time, and we talk about that in the class too. But I for many, many, many years, that was my standard protocol. I got a jar of the powdered herbs all mixed up already on the shelf. When I get a wound, out it comes and off we go. So you can pre-mix those.
Well, it's a great way to get started. It's pretty easy. You can dry the herbs. Yep. You can, make that all up yourself. It's easy to handle. Or you can just, you can go to you can buy it. You can, folks, if you guys get into the full Dr. John's full class, he's also got a whole kit that represents the class. We'll talk about that in a little bit here. But you touched on this a little bit. And of course, that poultice has got a bunch of different herbs. And you were talking about the value, of having multiple herbs in there. And even the value of just one herb. And that kind of leads to the question, if for some reason you're on a budget, or maybe you're in a pinch and you've got to pick one herb to have for that poultice, out of the 10 that you recommend in your class. And I forgot how many were there in that poultice. Like, what would you absolutely keep in the formula? What's bare bones necessity for that?
So bare bones necessity for healing a wound. You want to do two things. You want to heal it and you want to kill the bugs, right? Comfrey's the rock star for healing stuff. And, if you had some calendula or some yarrow or some hops, or any number of other good antibiotic herbs, that'd be fine. That'd be fine. You don't have to use, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And I did a video on my YouTube channel. It's 10 herbs that can change your life, and I talk about 10 herbs that are real rock stars and really great, but I could do that 10 other times with 10 other herbs and it would be just the same thing. There's lots of plants out there that have these actions. If I was up in the hills, I wouldn't probably have any comfrey out in the woods, but I'd have lots of hound's tongue, which is its cousin. And I'd sure be grinding that up and using it. And I'd probably find some yarrow too. And I'd be putting that in there, so now I've got my vulnerary cell proliferant healing guy, and I've got my antibiotic anti-inflammatory guy, and I'm good to go. We don't have to do things exactly the way we're doing them in this class. These are guidelines and ideas and thoughts. And, one of the things in my teaching that I like to emphasize is learn the plants and what they do. Don't learn a recipe or a formula. Learn what the plant's actions are, and you can apply it to all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, that really makes sense. And I think recipes and formulas like what you're suggesting here are a great place to get started, a great place to get something on the shelf to have so that you can practice like you were talking about earlier. But all of the herbs you mentioned a minute ago, I don't know if I have all of them, but the comfrey, the calendula, the hops, the yarrow, those are all super easy to grow. So while you've got the poultice on your shelf and you're practicing that when it comes up, learn to grow those herbs and then learn all about them, like you're saying. And you're really just embarking into an exciting journey. You know what? Take a second, because you touched on tincture, and I had notes to bring this up actually. And how does the tincture work? And I know we're not going to go into talking about how to do a tincture. You go into it in the full class. And so people can get in there and watch that if they want. But tell us just a little bit about how the tincture works as opposed to a poultice.
So I had, over a very short period of time, several cases that weren't really ideal for a poultice solution because they were so large, or because of some other factor. And we talk about it in the class, what the cases were and why we did it that way. But I started using a tincture made of the poultice formula. Okay, so the same herbs, but I made a tincture out of it, which is an alcohol extract. And then I take a teaspoon of that tincture, because the alcohol is too zingy to put in a wound. It burns, so that's no fun. But I found that if I actually started out by making a tea. That was the first case I did. I made a tea out of the poultice, and it worked great. And so I thought, well, gee, making tea is a pain in the neck too. What if I just put some tincture and diluted it with some water so it didn't hurt as much? Wonder if that would work. And I started doing those kinds of experiments. And I found that if I put a teaspoon of the poultice tincture, of a tincture made of the poultice herbs, into 2 to 4 ounces of water in a spray bottle and sprayed the wound, that it worked just as well as the complicated, messy, thick, exciting historical poultice. And it was no work at all and didn't make a mess, And so that's what I'm doing now almost exclusively, except on some wound types. And we get into that in the class, where I still like a poultice better. But 9 out of 10 times, I'm using the tincture, putting a teaspoon of that in a couple ounces of water in a spray bottle and spraying that on the wound. And that's a really nice way to store your poultice, because the life of a tincture on your shelf is much longer than the life of the powdered herbs on your shelf. So it's really handy, really portable, really easy. And if you got some water in a spray bottle, you're ready, so that works really well.
No, I like the options, and I like just kind of the theme. There's different modalities you can use. You can figure out what works well for you. There's different herbs you can use, but the point is use them, get going and get herbs onto the wound, and you're going to see progress. You're going to see success. And one last question for this that we didn't really cover, but I just want to touch on. You go and you deep dive this in the actual full class, but There's one kind of wound that you need to deal with a little bit differently, particularly here, and that is puncture wounds. And so we'll dive into it in the class more, but really quickly, what would you not want to do with a puncture wound that we talked about here?
So the primary thing with a puncture wound is that you have, instead of a long, open, shallow cut, you have a very deep, very narrow wound channel, very narrow. And it's very difficult for stuff to work its way out of that pinhole, or nail hole, or whatever it is. And so the worst thing you can do for a puncture wound is put comfrey on it, because that heals it up really fast. And now you're going to get an abscess, right? Because you've plugged up the hole and nothing can get out. So we're going to get an abscess. So I don't ever use comfrey on a puncture wound. But I do like to use poultices. That was the kind of wound that I still do a poultice on, is on a bite wound or a puncture wound, because the poultice mechanically has a lot of drawing power. But I don't put comfrey in that poultice. I put the ground flax is great. I put some plantain in it. I'll put some antibiotics, some calendula or yarrow or something. And that formula is in the sheet too. And we talk about puncture wounds specifically in the class. But that's a place that I still use a puncture wound, because I see a lot of bite wounds in my life. Dogs and cats are very good at getting bite wounds. And I use that drawing poultice to pull stuff out. Right. But no comfrey for those kids, because it heals it up too fast.
Yeah. Very good. Well, and you dive in that in the class, and it's a good segue for a few minutes just to talk about your full class, because what we've touched on here today is just a small part of what you can do with first aid and herbs at home. And so I want to show you guys the full class that Patrick put together for you on the School of Traditional Skills, diving in and approaching first aid, basic first aid from an herbal perspective. And this is taking a look inside the class. Of course, you're going to get a little familiar with Dr. Jones, and then he's going to get right into getting you your supplies. You're going to build a first aid kit in this class, but with some of its traditional first aid supplies and wraps and scissors and all the things you need to handle first aid, along with all the herbs and all the things that you need to have on the shelf as well to address these types of situations and everything else that we cover in the class. So it's going to get you all lined out. You're going to have your own, herbal first aid kit. You're also going to cover, and he's going to take you through 10 herbs that are really easy to use. They're easy to grow. They're easy to get. They're safe. I think, if I remember right, Doc, correct me, I think all of the herbs in there, are they safe for pregnant women, or do we talk about?
Not all of them are.
Okay.
They're all safe topically. They're all safe topically for a pregnant woman.
Okay.
But there's a couple of those that shouldn't be taken during pregnancy.
And so he covers that, so you know what to do with those herbs as well, and to get those into your first aid kit. And going to go into some basics about making, herbal medicine making and making teas, then on into making tinctures and drying herbs to help get you all set up and prepared. So all those things are going to get you a foundation, get you ready, so that then you can start treating things like treating bites and stings and working through that, as well as treating burns and knowing how to identify burns. That's a really cool thing about this class. It's not just herbs, it's solid first aid as well. And of course, burns is one of those areas is kind of like, okay, what can I deal with here? Where do I need to move on? And so he's going to cover all that and give you confidence in dealing with, a certain level of burns there at home, and knowing when else to deal with it. Eye problems, that's a huge one on the homestead. And if you're living a country life, it's so easy to get things on our eyes and feel like we need to rush to the ER and the urgent care, but he's going to help you treat it naturally right here. Deeper dive into stopping bleeding, dealing, with the bleeding. We saw some of that today, and he expounds a little bit more on the class, along with closing a wound and promoting healing and managing infection. Of course, that was the core of today's talk, but we go into a little more detail there. Getting into that treating the puncture wound, which is a different type of wound, and there's some things you need to know there to handle that. And so the doc dives into that as well a little bit deeper. And another one's managing pain. That's something that accompanies almost every injury, right? And this is something you don't hear a lot about, and it's really excited. This section of the class is really exciting. And I love it that the doc was able to bring that to us in the class and to help you naturally manage pain through these situations, along with splinting sprains, stabilizing broken bones, a little bit about knowing how to identify them, get them stabilized so that you can then get on to care, knowing when you need to do that. And then, of course, some follow-up, where to go from there. There's a whole bunch of FAQs in there. We've tried to make sure we, take care of the questions that you're going to ask and that are going to come up if they didn't get covered in the class. So ton of support that's really going to give you a foundation in first aid at home, but using herbs that you can either buy and get on your shelf, which is a great way to start. And we actually provide a whole kit coming from Dr. Jones for you for that. And of course, then hopefully you're going to move on and eventually grow those herbs. And this is not YouTube. I hope you guys saw in the videos that we did today. This is not YouTube video. This is high quality, detailed lessons that are getting you all the details, getting you all the steps, and just getting you right in there and learning how to actually do it so that you can put your kit together, put your things together, and apply it. But besides all the high quality video and the step-by-step, we provide what we call skill sheets. And I kind of chuckle now that we call them skill sheets because these are really, ebooks that come with the class that are downloadable. You can keep them forever. And they give you the summaries, they give you the step-by-steps, it gives you the recipes that you can refer to, that you can print out and put that with your first aid kit, so you don't have to go to the iPad or something and open up the class. Hopefully you've watched it and learned, but then you have this right there with your kit, and that's super, super valuable for this class and every single other class. This class is designed, as are all of the classes of the School of Traditional Skills, to help you shortcut the learning curve and get you straight to using herbs to treat your family's first aid issues effectively, safely, and with confidence. And that's one of the biggest challenges here, is just feeling confident and stepping right in and getting going. And that's how we've designed this class, to get you the knowledge you need without a bunch of confusing information or too much side conversation. Although Dr. Jones is always so much fun to talk to and listen to, he makes it interesting too, but it's going to get you there, get you going, and get you confident right away. And so, you're going to feel great when you start reaching to your own cabinet. You don't feel like you got to pick up the phone. You don't feel like you have to run out the door right away. You're going to have your own remedies. You're going to have your own solutions, your own first aid kit that is going to help you treat your own family. And that feels amazing. That's what self-sufficiency is about. That's what resilience is about. Some of the things that we're looking for to take care of ourselves and our family as we're building, these traditional skills. And, one of the really cool things, if you're not familiar with the school yet, is that Dr. Jones classes, while it's our newest release, it's only one of over a dozen classes in the school that are going to help you on your journey to learning traditional skills, to building your homesteading life. And it's really a shortcut to increasing your health, your self-sufficiency in a very straightforward way. And, you guys, we all have busy lives. And we're wanting to learn these different skills. And we wanted to make it so that you could still live your life, not have to stop everything, and have quality education that you can apply these things wherever you're at, wherever you're living, as you're on the journey to building this life. And so we've got all these other classes in here, and they're growing. There's pressure canning class with my wife, Carolyn Thomas. Joel Salatin is taking you out in the pasture and helping you, rehabilitate broken down pasture, because almost any of us that buy any land or move out to the country, that land needs help. Justin Rhodes is going to get you going with raising meat chickens and butchering and cooking those chickens. The classes really just go on. Like I said, Carolyn's class with pressure canning, that's it's one that's scary for a lot of people. Carolyn makes it so easy to dive right in, get going. Plus you get some awesome recipes to get ready-made meals and the produce, from the barn or the garden onto your shelf. And from Ann of All Trades is taking you through dairy goats, everything you need to know to selecting for dairy goats, taking care of them, milking them, and even turning some of that milk into dairy products in your kitchen. And also Brian from Next Level Gardening, Brian Lowell. And getting raised beds, that's one of the best ways to get going is with raised bed gardening, but there's some real tips and tricks you need to know and some great systems that really help you put that together. And, these are just a few of the classes. One of our most popular classes is by Brandon Shear, the Farmstead Meatsmith, where he teaches you how to cure pork with salt. That's it, salt and pork, and have your own healthy bacon hanging in the kitchen. And, I can go on the list. This is just a few the samplings of classes. These are a couple of our next classes that are going to come up soon. The proper knife usage and sharpening is coming out next month. And do you know the knife is one of the most common used tools on the homestead? And yet so many of us don't know how to select the right knife. We don't know how to sharpen it properly and take care of it, and even how to use them. And that's going to be a fantastic class, along as some homestead design to help you get organized. And this isn't just for people buying raw land. This is for helping you organize your homestead, whether you're on 1/8 of an acre or 40 acres. So that's some of the stuff we're excited about that's coming up. But the School of Traditional Skills, it's your ticket to accelerated learning, to putting the skills to use that you need right now, wherever you're at. You don't have to wait to move to the country to have 5 acres, to have 40 acres. You want to start learning the skills now and doing what you can where you're at. And so we've been building this school and these classes in a way that's going to help you right now where you're at. Like I said, you're going to jump straight from the learning to the doing. That's our goal, to get you out there quickly, whether it's herbs and herbal first aid, whether it's pressure canning, or, raising and processing your own meat. It's going to get you out there without wasting a bunch of time trying to find good instructions, filtering through YouTube and all the armchair coaches, or all the long explanations where you kind of got to pick and choose details. This is going to help you get there. And any one of these classes, like Doc's Herbal First Aid class, is worth easily $250 to $300 a piece for the production that's gone in them, the knowledge that's shared, the way it's shared. And yet you're going to get access to all 13 classes and all the new classes for as long as you remain a member for one regular price. And that is $24 a month. Or if you want to go for the annual, which is a little bit better of a deal, for $240 a year. And that's a savings from our regular price there that you see of $29 a month or $290. That's a huge value, you guys, especially as we're adding classes month over month over month. We're getting ready to release a community in April, it looks like. That's the goal. Can't promise that, but that is the goal, where you guys are going to be able to interact with each other and really accelerate your learning curve and interaction. So that's a fun thing that's coming up. But I really want you to think about the School of Traditional Skills. Doc's class is worth the annual subscription, hands down, no problem. You'll save yourself time and money besides all the other classes. But we've always got a 30-day guarantee, so you can get in there, you can try it. If in 30 days, you don't think it's worth it, you didn't get time to get to it, no problem, no questions asked. We'll refund you your money. We're confident you're going to love the school. So I want to encourage you right now, while we're getting ready to go to the Q&A, to click the link that should have just come up on your screen, or, if you're old school, you can type it in, but it's kind of long. School of Traditional Skills over at Plans First Aid Special. And get in there and grab access to the school right now. You can click that link. It's not going to take you away from the event, so you can stay here and, get in on the Q&A. Let me just share a few things with you. Carla Anthony says, my husband and I did our first chicken harvest this weekend, and it was so much fun. I'd completed the Justin Rhodes class on chicken butchering and was more confident than I thought I would be. Thank you so much for these wonderful classes. And Nicole here, who says, I love what you share. A lot of it's already understood for us because we're full-time dairy and beef farmers, but it's a valuable resource of encouragement as we can relate and connect. Plus, it offers refinement of skills already learned and an opportunity to learn and apply more. And I get this question a lot. Are these classes just for folks that are brand new? No, it's not. It's going to help. Any of these classes are going to help anybody that's brand new. But when we've got people like Doc Jones, Justin Rhodes, Joel Salatin in, you're always going to learn something new when these guys or these ladies are speaking, and there's depth there for anybody that is, coming along on this journey with us. So really want to encourage you right now, while we've got this special to jump in and join the School of Traditional Skills, get it for this discount. It's only here today and for a few days. We'll send you some emails with the replay. But get in there and check that out. And let's see here. That's the end of my story there. We want to get into the Q&A here. And so I want to encourage you guys right now to start putting your questions for Doc Jones in the Q&A section. Please put it in the Q&A section. That's how we're going to get to it the best and the quickest, because the chat's going to blow up here in a second when I tell you the next thing I want you to do. Because while you guys are putting your questions into the Q&A, please don't put it in the chat, put it in the Q&A. While you're doing that, we're going to get ready to give away a few lifetime memberships for the School of Traditional Skills. This is something we do at every free event. We want to help a few people just get in there and get going. And so what I want you to do is type your full name and I love Herbal First Aid. Okay, you got to follow the directions. Full name, I love Herbal First Aid. And we're going to pick a few winners. Our moderators are going to pick a few winners while we're answering these questions over the next few minutes here. So, Doc, you ready for some questions?
I'm ready.
Throw them at you. Okay. Let's see here. Question from Janice Cleary. Is the premix herbs in a jar, is water added, or do you have to add water when you're ready to use? So is it already in there, or do you need to add it right before you use it?
No, you're going to want to add it right before you use it. So the shelf life of a dry herb is a year or so. The shelf life of dry herbs with water in them on your shelf is a day and a half. So let's not do that. Let's keep them dry till we're ready, and then add the water. Yep. Right.
Okay. So if you put that water in, you can use that you can use that for a day or two, but then get rid of it, start over. All right.
The shelf life of a tea in the fridge is about 3 days. Okay. If you're making tea, but, and we can talk about that in the class, but no, you want to store herbs dry, or better yet, make a tincture.
I think you're reading my questions that I'm about to throw at you. You nailed that one. Gail Sheldon said, how far ahead can you make wound cleansing tea? And can you store it in the refrigerator? So I think your answer was, just to recap, make sure I got it right. You can about 3 days store it in the refrigerator.
Right.
Yeah.
So don't make a week's worth of it. Make 3 days worth. You know what I mean? Make small batches, because otherwise it's going to get weak and not good for you.
Right. Do you use purified water, or is tap well water okay for mixing herbs?
So in my experience, I've found that I only use wet water. It has to be wet. I have a thing I can turn on my faucet, comes right out. That's the water I always use. I don't use sterile water. I just use regular tap water. If your well's not full of E. coli and safe to drink out of, you're just fine to use that too. Most of the things we're doing have antibiotics in them anyway, right? So they work all right.
Okay. Good to know. Let's see here. We're going to call out one winner right now. Fiona Books. Fiona Books, you have won a lifetime membership to the School of Traditional Skills. That means everything's yours for the life of the school. Every class that ever comes out is yours. You're going to have access to the community, the app we're going to develop. We've got community support in there. So Fiona Books, what I'd like you to do is please email hello@School of Traditional Skills with your full name there, and we'll get you set up. Please do that while we're on here today, okay? You got to claim it while we're here. So congratulations, Fiona. Super excited for you. Can't wait to see you in the school. Let's see here. I was getting a note, so I was trying to read it, but looks like they moved on. Okay. Questions from Donna Thompson. Any books that you would recommend to learn the plants and what they do? Do you have a favorite book?
I have written 2 books that I think are real handy. One is called The Homegrown Herbalist, and one is called The Homegrown Herbalist to Medicinal Weeds. And those are 2 really great areas to understand. We talked about that. If I've got my garden, 2 things every herbalist ought to have, every homesteader ought to have, is a little herb garden out back and the knowledge of some weeds for when you're not near your little herb garden, right? And each of those books has, I don't know, 20 or 30 plants each. the homegrown herbalist has plants that are super easy to grow on your place, and the weed book has weeds, and so knowing those plants, if you just knew half of the plants in either of those books, you'd have some tremendous tools, so those are good resources. They're very easy to read, lots of illustrations. You can get them on homegrownherbalist.net. But that's, not that I'm biased at all, but those are the books I would get.
Those are the go-to. Well, it's good
That's
because
right.
there's so if you go looking for books, there's information overload. So,
Yeah.
I'm happy to say, hey, go straight to Doc Jones's books. In fact, moderators, if we can find the links from Doc's maybe website, is that the best place to go for your books?
Yeah.
Yeah. If we can find that and drop that in the chat for people, that would be great. Let's see here. Stephanie Johnston says, do the dried herbs have an expiration date if they are kept in a mason jar?
So again, the shelf life of dried herbs is a year or two. They don't get, dangerous or bad after more time than that. They just get weaker and less effective. But, cool, dark, if you got a little oxygen absorber, moisture absorber, that's great. If you have a freeze dryer, you can freeze dry them. They probably last a little longer. But for herbs that you're just air drying, I would say the shelf life is going to be about a year. If you grew them yourself and dried them, you might get a little longer than that. But yeah, that's kind of what you're looking at for shelf life.
Cool. Okay. Question about the school here, and we get this one a lot. Are if you join today, are you getting access just to Doc Jones's class, or are you getting access to all the classes? And you are always getting access to all of the classes. And right now you're getting access to all the classes that are there. So there's 13 classes there right now. And as long as you remain a member, you're going to get access to every class that comes out. So if you sign up for an annual, you're going to end up with access during that time to probably, 20 to 24 classes in there that are going to help you along your journey. And we're doing some exciting things this year. We're going into dairy this year, some classes on dairy and seed starting and beekeeping. All those are coming out. So you're going to have access to all of those. It's not just this one class. And that's what's really, really cool, the way we were able to do this, where we can provide access for about the price of one class, but you get all of them on the platform. So yeah, it's hard to beat. Also, before I get on to the next question, make sure you take this opportunity while we're here and you've got us on live, not only to ask Doc questions, but if you have particular classes about the school that helps you make a decision, happy to answer those right now while we're here. Let's see. Oh, hey, Fiona Book. She claimed her class. Congratulations, Fiona. You claimed not your book, but your access to the school. And that's really, really excited. Just want to welcome you to the School of Traditional Skills. Natalie Dunwoody is asking, what is the shelf life for a tincture?
So the shelf life of tinctures is longer than powders. Alcohol is a really good preservative. And there's a little variation, based on which plant and even which chemicals in which plant. But I'm very comfortable using tinctures that are many years old. And again, worst case scenario, they might get a little weaker over the years. But I've got tinctures that I made 5 years ago, 10 years ago that that I've used and thought they worked great. So I just think that for long-term storage, tincture is absolutely the way to go. They seem to hold their potency really well.
Yeah. And again, Doc takes you through for the first day of class how to make these tinctures inside the class and use them. I mean, using them is super simple, but he's going to take you through all those details inside the class. Let's see here. Kai Wright is asking, can I use flax meal instead of ground flaxseed for the poultice?
I don't know what flax meal is. Is that different than ground flaxseed? What's flax meal?
I'm not really sure what is all in the meal. I'm trying to think. it's going to have other parts of the plant besides the seed. Matter of fact, it may not have the seed. It may be the other stuff where it's going to be a mix. It's probably not going to be just the flax seed.
Yeah. I don't know what it is. If he can tell us what it is, I can have an opinion about it though.
Okay. There you go. Well, if you can drop that in, the chat box is just going crazy right now with entries for the giveaway. So I don't think he's going to get much of a word in edgewise for a few minutes. But if you see it slow down, maybe clarify that for us. Let's see here. Carol Robinson's asking, will dried herbs maintain potency if they're kept in the freezer?
Yeah, and again, you might extend the shelf life a little bit doing that. I don't know if it's enough to be a big deal. The main thing with dried herbs, the most destructive thing with dried herbs is sunlight. You want to keep them out of the light. That's much more detrimental to an herb than temperature.
Yeah. Talk to us about storage in jars, because a lot of people think all you need to do is just get a different colored jar than clear. But there are some jars that work better than others for protecting from sunlight. Yeah.
So the only glass that's light protective is the amber, the brown bottles. You can buy green bottles and blue bottles and all kinds of colors of bottles, but the only one that's really light protective is the amber, unless it says in big letters on the bottle, UV protective. It's not. And so if for tinctures, I always store those in amber bottles. But I also store stuff in mason jars all the time. I just put them in a cupboard because cupboard doors are also very light protective, right? And so it's just a question of keeping them out of sunlight. And if you have a mason jar full of whatever tincture you're making, that's fantastic. Just keep it in the cupboard. When you use it, pull it out and use it and do your thing and put it back in the cupboard. It'll last just as long as if it were in an amber bottle.
Yeah, mason jars are just about the duct tape of the kitchen, it seems like,
Yeah, they're awful handy.
so many uses.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Verna Smith is asking, and this is a good one. This is good for people. What is the difference between, well, she says what's the difference between using essential oils and tinctures? And maybe you want to explain a little bit just the fundamental difference between essential oil and tincture, and then the use so that that's clear for people.
So an essential oil is a volatile oil that's produced by the plant. For example, anybody in the mint family produces a lot of essential oils. I mean, you can walk past a patch of mint and smell those oils, very aromatic, very quick to evaporate. The way you make essential oils is by running steam in a still through the plant material. And then, as the steam cools, the oils, drip into a little bottle. And I've made essential oils. It's a pretty simple process, actually. But sometimes it takes a lot of material. But I use very few essential oils. And the reason is that you're only getting one factor of the plant. And a lot of these plants have all kinds of other chemistry and medicinal properties that aren't in the essential oil. They're in some other part of the plant, And so it's sort of like the essential is sort of the icing on the cake, but the cake is good too, And so for some conditions and some applications, essential oils are really fantastic. But I always feel sort of sad that we're missing all the other good nutrients and medicinals that are in the rest of that plant material by just focusing on the oils. And some medicinal plants don't make any essential oils, obviously. And so, you've got to use the herb for that. The other thing is that essential oils take a lot of material to produce. They take a little more technology to produce. I have some, there's a lot more risk to taking essential oils internally. If you don't do it right, there's, we're seeing in the veterinary professions, some cats and dogs react very badly to some essential oils because they have different enzymes in their livers and they turn them into poisonous things. And people are putting them in vaporizers and things, and their dogs are dying from liver failure later, And so essential oils are slightly, in some instances, in some things, they're slightly riskier. It's a much more refined thing. And I think personally, God made these plants to be these ideal delivery systems. And essential oils in some ways are a lot like pharmaceuticals, where we're saying, that's the part I want right there. That's the chemical I want. And we take that out and leave everything else behind. And everything that we're leaving behind was also really great and actually made the essential oils safer and more effective, you know? And so that's kind of where I'm at with them. And I don't mean to say anything bad about them, or, they're really wonderful tools. They're wonderful tools for some things, but I never use them hardly in my practice. I like the whole cake.
Yeah. I like some cake with my frosting too.
Yeah.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, and when we realize that really through nature, God's given us so much of what we need, and it's there, and it's made the way it's made for a reason. It seems like we're always trying to break things down and pull out one element, and it seems like we're simplifying. Yeah. And I know there's benefits to that at times, but it seems like we really complicate it in pursuing that process when when we've got the answers right there. And
the plant is a package deal, and the body is designed to process it as the package deal. And when we just take one element of something and that's all we give the body, it's a very different experience for the body,
Yeah.
So
let's see. I need to address a technical here. Our chat box is just getting slammed with entries, and they're so fast, and I almost feel like I'm seeing duplicate names. You guys, it doesn't do any good to do duplicate names. There's so much happening. It's not even readable. So if anybody in there is trying to get help or say anything, we can't read anything in the chat box right now. So just want to encourage you to slow it down, let it go. It's there. We've picked the names. We have them unless somebody doesn't show up. There we go. Starting to slow down. I'm seeing people entering. You're entering it 10 times. That actually doesn't encourage us to pick you. So you guys have covered it well. The chat box needs to be available for people if they've got a technical issue, or not. Estrella, you got to let it go. Anyways, we do have another winner. I've never seen anything like this before. The way this chat box is going. So think about other people, folks. There's other people that maybe, need to say something or ask for help or something. So we got to quit bombing the chat box there. Isaac Olmus. Isaac, you have won a lifetime membership to the School of Traditional Skills. Congratulations, Isaac. Isaac Olmos. That is OLMOS. Make sure you email hello at schooloftraditionalskills.com. We've got that right up there at the top of the chat box for you. And email in there, and we'll get you access. Please do that while we're here. We got another few minutes while we're here together, and let's get you in there. And to my moderator, the answer to that question is yes, please do, as quickly as you can. That's just not being reasonable for other people here. Okay, let's see. Trying to move on past that. Marjorie Lascelle, what do you suggest to grind your herbs? What's the best way to break those herbs down into a powder?
So after I dry the herbs, I grind them in a blender. We have a big commercial grinding machine that I spent a lot of money on, but almost exclusively still, after all these years, we're doing almost all of our grinding in Vitamix blenders. And I don't get any money from Vitamix for saying that. I ought to call them and get a nickel every time I say Vitamix. But anyway, the Vitamix blenders work great. I would guess any other blender that's any good would work great. But that's how we do it. We grind them up. The only thing you have to be careful of at all is that if the herb is if you have an herb that's particularly dense, or if you fill the blender up a lot, it can get hot in there. You don't want it to get hot, so feel the sides of the blender. Is not as long as it's not getting hot, you're okay. But that's how we do it. We grind them up in a blender.
Cool. Going backwards to that question that we had about the flaxseed, he was asking, could he use flaxseed meal as opposed to just the seed? Somebody, now that the chat box is readable, somebody commented that the meal is the whole ground flaxseed meal. So I think it's everything. It's not just the seed. It's probably the husk and that's a lot of other parts in it, not just the seed.
Yeah, if it's the flax head, that's great. That'd be fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't care if there's a little husk or something in there. That's just going to be more absorptive. That's not a problem at all.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Let's see here. Question from Rochandra Lomax Cook. Can you make tinctures with something besides drinking alcohol? And I think this is a good one to expound on, because I understand there's a lot of people don't drink at all. They don't want any alcohol. But I think they also may not understand, the modality and the use there. So maybe I'm adding to the question, can you use something else? But, why do you use alcohol? And I think there's some valid reasons to use it.
Yeah. So you can make a tea. You can make a glycerite with glycerin instead of alcohol. You can make a vinegar. But the fact is that the teas and the glycerites and the vinegars, none of them have anywhere near the solvent power to dissolve the chemistry out of the plant, number one. And none of them have anywhere near the preservative power, number two. And so alcohol really is the ideal thing. And I understand that some people have strong feelings about alcohol. I don't drink at all, and some people are in religious faiths that don't do alcohol. I'm all for that too. But ask yourself, if your religious faith says it's okay to take Demerol when you break your leg, it's probably okay to take 30 drops echinacea if you have a cold. Okay.
Yeah.
Religiously, I think God made all these things for our use. I promise, if you drink enough herb tincture to have any fun alcohol effect, the herb will kill you. Okay. You don't want to drink that much of it. We're taking very small doses. The alcohol actually helps it penetrate the tissues better. I mean, I use tinctures, and we talk about this in the class about using tinctures topically for pain. When the skin's not broken or anything, you just got a sore elbow and you spray a tincture on it, soaks right in. And that's a way you can use alcohol and not ingest it, I guess, for those kinds of applications. But, I have very strong feelings about consumption of alcohol, and I take tinctures all the time. Okay.
Yeah.
And so it's a completely different thing. It's not going to be in any way disorienting or inebriating or intoxicating. It's not going to interfere with your free will or your driving skills or anything else. It's a vehicle for getting medicine into your body. God probably would say, stop sticking needles into yourself for fun if we did that. But he wouldn't care if we got an injection of medication, right? So you just have to sort of look at things for the purpose that they're doing and what they're doing. But yeah, there's other ways. If a person's an alcoholic and really doesn't want any risk of, having trouble with that again, I appreciate that. Take the herbs in a different way. Just put the powder in a smoothie, make a tea. There's all kinds of other ways to get them into your body. And it doesn't matter a bit hardly how you get them into your body for their action, whether you spread them on your peanut butter sandwich or put them in a tea or put them in a tincture. Once the herbs get into you, they're going to do their job. And if you really, really don't want to do the alcohol, there's plenty of ways to do that. But I would counsel, think about what the alcohol is there for, what it's doing. Maybe that's why God made alcohol, is so that we could have it for a medicine, not for a kegger on the weekend,
Everything's got its purpose, and nothing here is
That's-
that's being used in a good purpose. Nothing here is being used, to abuse it, and you're going to have multiple problems if you're abusing it any which way you go.
Yep.
What just real quick, what proof alcohol do you need in a specific type here, real quick? Like vodka 80 proof, or just what?
Yeah.
What
So the proof that you want, the proof is twice the percent. Okay. So 100 proof vodka, for example, is 50% alcohol, 50% water. 80 proof vodka is 40% alcohol, 60% water. That's the proof. And it doesn't matter, if you didn't have vodka, but you had something else that was 100 proof, and I don't know enough about booze to even know what that would be, whether it's whiskey or gin or who knows what.
Mm-hmm.
If it's 100 proof, it'll work. Okay. The reason we use vodka is because it's cheap. And this is this is not a social event. This is a chemical, pharmaceutical event, a medical event. And so, we don't care if we're getting the fancy 12-year-old aged, whatever it is, that's 100 proof and costs $200 a bottle instead of $10 a bottle. That's the only reason we use vodka preferentially, but anything that's 100 proof is good. And the reason, and we talk about this in the school too, when we talk about tincture making, but vodka, because it's half alcohol and half water, some chemicals in plants like the water. They're more soluble in the water, and some are more soluble in the alcohol. And so if you use vodka, everybody's happy. You're getting really good broad spectrum extraction. If you used wine, which has way less alcohol in it, you're going to get way fewer of the alcohol soluble chemicals. You're going to get more water soluble stuff. And depending on the plant, that may not matter. But for some of the plants, the stuff you want is the alcohol soluble stuff. And on the other end of the spectrum, if something is not water soluble, there's a few herbs that are like tree saps and things, frankincense and myrrh and, things like that are really so oily that they have no respect for water at all. And so, there may be some advantage to using even a higher concentration of alcohol on those things. Yeah. But I use vodka for almost everything. I mean, vodka's the sort of universal herbalist tincture hooch.
Let me clarify real quick before we move on. 100 proof, it needs to be 100 proof, or is 80 proof okay?
80 proof's okay.
Okay.
80 proof's fine. It's about half and half.
Sometimes 80 proof's a little easier to get than 100, depending on where people live and whatnot. So 80 proof is okay for those of you that were batting that around in the chat. Let's see, Isaac Almos, Isaac claimed his membership, so congratulations. Welcome to School of Traditional Skills. Jump right in there, and we've got one more winner here. Assuming she's here and she claims it, and we'll hang out. Sharon Shaw. Sharon Shaw, you've won a lifetime membership to the School of Traditional Skills. Please sign right in, email hello@schooloftraditionalskills.com and claim that. Just in case you're not here, we will give it to somebody else. So grab that as quickly as you can. We got time for a couple more questions, but I've got a question about the school I want to answer. And a couple folks were asking if this is a recurring charge or a one-time charge. And it is a reoccurring. It's a membership. So to try to make it accessible, we've made a monthly option at a lower price so that you can get in there and try it for a while at a lower cost, see how it goes, eventually upgrade if you like it. The annual is actually the best deal there, but it is reoccurring. And, what that does is that allows us to bring you reoccurring value to continue to add to the school and build on it and add more and more classes. And you guys, to our members, we're asking you guys, what do you want to see next? And we're trying to meet you where you're at. So there's a lot of value in that reoccurring. Make sure you check that out. And one other thing I forgot to talk about, for members only, Doc Jones is coming back in about 2 weeks, only for members, to do another session where we're going to answer your questions after you've taken the class. So you can get in there, take the class, get familiar with it, try some of the things, and Doc's going to come back in only for members and answer your questions, and then that's going to stay up in the membership. So that's really, really valuable. Doc doesn't have a lot of time. He can't hang out with us every day, and that he's willing to come back for a couple hours, give you guys a chance to get in there, take the classes, and then come back and ask him questions personally is really, really cool. So I want to encourage you to take him up on that, take us up on that, and get in the class right now. Check it out. All right, we've got time for one or two more questions. Peter B. Wellman, if you don't have cayenne, can powdered ginger be substituted for cayenne?
Well, ginger has some similar actions to cayenne. It's a warming sort of nature. It won't stop bleeding like cayenne will. What you could use instead of cayenne, if you have it, would be jalapeno or habanero or serrano or poblano or Scottish bonnet or any of the other hot peppers. They're actually all the same species. They're all Capsicum annuum. And just over the years, sadistic chefs have bred them into different heat values and colors, but they'll all work. They all have capsaicin in them. So any hot pepper can be substitute for cayenne for these topical uses we're talking about and be just as effective. But ginger's, for some things that you do with cayenne, ginger's a great herb catalyst. It's great for some things. But it's not it doesn't have a lot of similarity for some of the things we're doing. It doesn't have a lot of similarity.
Yeah. Yeah. Good to know. So, but you can substitute with a lot of different peppers. Well, we're out of time. We've got to go. I want to thank all of you for being here. Everybody thank Dr. Patrick Jones for being here. And make sure you jump in, get in there, take the whole class. It goes way deeper than this and is really going to help you along your way. And like I said, part of the benefit of this class and all our instructors here in 2023, they're coming back and doing QAs after you guys have had time to take the class. And there's really nothing like being able to sit here and chat and talk out the details, to get to take a class and then get to sit and talk about it and work out some of the details around it. And so I'm really thankful for Doc Jones that he's willing to come back and do that. So get in there, get the class, check out the other ones, the School of Traditional Skills. We hope to see you as a member back here in a couple of weeks. And remember, we'll send a replay here this afternoon and with more information on the school as well. So great hanging with you all, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks, Doc.
Thanks, guys. It was great to see you.